Welcome back after a short break. Now we are starting with our this year edition of conference. I'm together with Dino Esposito, who is the chief chief technology officer at Creonet, and Dino will present for us a presentation under the title on the role of the unit test. And of course, at the end, we will have a short Q&A session, so don't hesitate and post your question during the Dino's presentation. Dino, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Just a couple of sentences about my role and my company and the work I do, but just to put into perspective the message that I will be sharing through this presentation. On the role of unit tests, as a disclaimer, I'm not a huge fan of unit tests, so you can expect to hear opinions and perspectives on unit tests significantly different from the mainstream. Now, I'm using whatever statement, whatever perspective that I'll be presenting today in my everyday activity with my team is not a huge team. We are about 20 people. And we are the company that runs operations for a couple of very popular sports worldwide. So the software and the platforms we develop are used significantly in everyday practice and in a scenario that, like in live sports, do not, because of the betting, for example, do not admit for failures and for live bugs. Okay, this said...
Sorry, John, that I interrupt you, but please move your Teams window because it's
okay, sorry.
your presentation is hidden behind and
okay, so now it's
Thank
okay.
You.
Now ready to go on the role of unit tests. Now the slide presents three specific popular perspectives on unit tests. The main objective of unit tests is isolate written code and determine if it works as intended. Second statement, unit testing is a very fundamental, important step in the development process. If done correctly, third statement, unit tests can detect early flaws in code, which may be much more difficult and costly to find later in testing stages. Three statements that you will find everywhere if you Google around, even if you ask a ChatGPT, you'll get this more or less. But now let's put some colors on this slide. The green, it's a sentence that is all but arguable. It's absolute truth. The main objective of unit testing is to isolate written code and determine if it works as intended. What we can argue in this sentence is the definition of written code. What do you mean exactly by written code? What is the size of it? What is the location of it in the whole code base of the entire application? In yellow, if done correctly, unit tests can detect early flaws in code. Seems like, obvious. A descriptive statement. It has no substance. It's okay. Today rains. It rains. There's nothing you can do about that. It rains. The gray sentence, unit testing is an important step. That's just marketing. It makes no sense, no operational sense. So we can just remove that sentence and focus on the green part. Unit testing and testing, different things. So when you challenge, if you hear someone challenging the overall effectiveness of unit tests, it does not mean dismissing as a whole the value of the entire testing. Okay? Unit testing is a small part of the development workflow. And because of that, is part of one development workflow that is, for the most part, personal to the developer. So unit testing and testing are different things, but what you really need to test in your application. In our company, I, CTO, don't do, when I write code, I still write code. I don't do unit testing at all. And I don't encourage people to do it. But at the same time, I do not condemn who does it either. Yet we have business that runs. And I can tell you, there are at least two scenarios in the world we experience as developers and as people every day, in which applications run successfully without unit testing in the code base. One example is our platforms, which run tennis and paddle worldwide every day, 24/7, 365, 24/7. As I speak, there is an international huge tournaments going on in Rome. Last week was in Madrid. Next week will be in Paris, the Grand Slam tournament in Paris, and we run it on our platforms, the entire cycle of operations for around the tournament, which is not just exactly live scoring. That's a small part. There's a lot more. Players signing up for the tournaments, for booking their travel, booking their transportation on site, content for the LED walls, for the live scoring on court and live scoring sent out to betting companies. All this is run through a number of platforms, and none of them has a single unit test. The second example is Stack Overflow, which has been written and is popularized over the web as a platform that doesn't use extensively on a regular basis unit testing. So you can write code that works even without unit testing. So what about these two statements? Any serious developer must write unit tests. And you're not a good developer if you don't write unit tests. Religion, pure religion. Now, let's try to approach the theme and the role of unit tests using a sort of more scientific approach. Okay, in which way do unit tests make my code better? And what better does mean? A unit test is a method that instantiates a small portion of the app, a function, a method in a class, okay? No more than that. And verifies if that method works as expected in ideally several scenarios per method, per class, per module, okay? Verifies its behavior independently from other parts. Because one of the fundamental laws of unit testing is if you write a unit test on a method of a class, you must be sure that if it works or if it fails is because of the code that is inherent part of that method. If the method has a dependency on something else that lives elsewhere, the failure or the success may be, due to the external component and not to the code itself. You can still have a bug, but something else that is outside the logic of the method may determine the outcome of the test. So running any single piece of code in isolation is crucial. Without that, it makes no sense at all. Small portion means usually very small. So one method in one class, and per method you must be ideally trying several ways to call it, with nulls, in a way that throws exceptions, with random parameters, with right and wrong parameters, and see how it could react. Unit testing is a small part of our effort. How it can be crucial to the success and the delivery of a project. Now, imagine that the entire application is the frame you see on the screen now. Not considering the code base, the actual code base, we have typically 4 different layers of tests. unit test, integration test, system test, and the final acceptance test. Your money depends on the acceptance test. Passing the acceptance test, which is where you deliver, you present your code to the customer, and you have the customer pass the test. So the application in this scenario does this. Correct? Wrong. Integration and system tests is about how the various parts of the application, a real-world application is made of, work together. Now, I can tell you that in our scenario, we made a system integration tests over a couple of hours, and then we went live on production. It worked. Okay, fine. Crazy? Probably yes, but at the same time, both parties, the part to be integrated, were in our scenario particularly confident about the quality and the rightness of the code we wrote, that there were no need for spending more than a few hours to see if we could communicate together. No need to rerun the same thing for every build. If it works, works. But you have to be confident about the quality of the code you write. That's important. Unit tests is only one small part of this. You can have all unit testing pass and still integration test failing. And this is dramatic for the success of the application. Who cares about your unit tests in your code base repository of code if the integration between the parts fails, if you don't pass acceptance tests? Unit tests is only for developers to feel comfortable and to maybe negotiate everything else within the team, including salary. I do unit tests. I'm the best developer on the available on the market. Who cares if the application doesn't work? Because it's because of other teams. What really matters is integration and up. Unit tests, you can have it or not. It doesn't make any difference, in my personal opinion. Again, integration tests and system tests below acceptance tests level are much bigger and much more important for the success of the application than unit tests. Okay, this said, let's try to honestly look into the practice of having unit tests regularly with high levels of code coverage. Benefits? Now, Googling around, asking ChatGPT, proclaimed benefits of unit testing are summarized here. I believe that you may be 5, 6, or 7, or 3 points, but more or less it's about safer refactoring. Unit tests ensure that any change you make to the code base, the existing code base, don't break anything else silently. So if you do something and this ends up having ripple effects, bad effects on other parts of the code, unit tests are able to catch that if you have proper unit tests written. Higher code quality, less bugs, cleaner design, code self-documentation, which makes easier for new people in the onboarding phase to understand what that particular part of the code does, because looking at the tests, you can figure out what is the intended purpose of every single class and method. Also, costs are often mentioned because it is asserted that it's cheap to find bugs via tests than discovering them in live code, which I can agree, but more or less. Anyway, before we make an analysis on the proclaimed effects, let me state once and forever. Unit tests are a significant development cost. And this cost is paid not once, but several times in the entire development cycle. If the business logic changes, tests must be updated accordingly, must be rerun. So you have to test the unit test and then run the test again, the code. They must be, in case of deep refactoring, they must be completely reconsidered, reevaluated every time there are significant changes. The mythical 100% code coverage must be recalculated, because what represents, assuming that this chimerical 100% really exists, okay? If it's 100% valid for stage 1 of the code, when you refactor and move to stage 2 of the code, what is the right 100% code coverage must be recalculated in light of the new functions and the changes to the code. It's not a matter, 100% it doesn't have to be a matter of quantity. I test every single method. And if you test every single method and just have assert true, you have a code coverage 100%, but it makes no sense. It must be recalculated. And this is beyond writing and testing the tests at significant cost. Can you pay it? Yes, no, I don't know if you can pay it. It's part of the economy of every single project. Now, if you don't pay this cost, what you can face? Now, off the top of my head, with the greatest level of intellectual honesty I can apply, the actual benefits you get from having unit tests are safer refactoring and self-documentation for the code. But to achieve these two things, these are the things you can really get out of unit tests. Everything else is pure marketing, pure fluff. Now, to achieve these two benefits, unit tests are definitely one way to go, one possibility, one option. But it's important that you find a way in your project, in your company, you find a way to enable people, teams, to do refactoring in a safe way, safe enough way, and document code acceptably well, so that the onboarding on a project or even on a module of the project is relatively fast. If you can obtain the same benefits otherwise, why wasting time and money on unit tests only because if you don't use unit tests, you are not considered by who, by the way? A great developer. Coding without unit tests. What is crucial to do good business without unit tests? Deep knowledge of the business domain. That's crucial. That's fundamental. That's our key, personal key, Creonet key to success. We know very, very well our business domain. We know exactly what has to be done. We don't have user stories that someone else from the outside writes. We write user stories because it's the business domain knowledge that is absolutely deep and serious here. We know what must be done and how. Clearly, if you don't know exactly what code to write, if you are not familiar, deeply familiar with the domain, clearly the value of unit tests increase. So I understand that with my position, my strong position against the unit tests, because they are just a waste of time and money, is from the perspective of someone who works in a scenario and with people with strong business domain knowledge and one business domain knowledge. Documentation helper. If you know the domain, you see a small piece of code how it should be written. So again, unit tests are something extra on top, but it's obvious to you or your peers if the code is written correctly or not. Bugs. In our scenario, we must put a lot more attention on the level of acceptance, so the impact on users and users, than the code. So sometimes it's even acceptable to experience live bugs, okay, as long as the user process is fluent enough and if we are prompt to fix bugs instantaneously without bureaucracy. I can tell you the story that we went live on a project written, developed in a very short amount of time. So even if we wanted to do tests, we really had no test because it was either tests or the application, and we were under contract. So it was the time of COVID. So contracting was also significantly impacted by the crazy world it was 3 years ago in the middle of the COVID and pandemic. So we developed the platform in 3 months, and it was a minimally viable product. We tested in hours, the integration tests in hours. We went live, and it was acceptable that for the first week, we had to experience bugs and fix them live. But it lasted, I want to exaggerate, 3 months. And after these 3 months, the system is now 3 years that is in production 24/7 with nearly no intervention, only regular scheduled maintenance. The point of domain knowledge, increase of the domain knowledge is, in our experience, going hand in hand with the increase of productivity. And we experience that more in seniors than in new buyers. So in other words, the step up of developers in their expertise, salary, and career in our company is driven much more by their ability to capture the inner of the domain knowledge than practicing with technology aspects. If you learn the business domain, you are automatically more senior than other people. If you learn the next, the latest, the ultimate unit testing tool or framework, it does make a significant difference in our company, for our scenario, that of a company that works in one business domain. As long as you know how to do things, technologically speaking, the rest of the story is about how much you know of the domain. So what you should ideally take out of this talk, or this rant, if you like it to call this way. Don't take anything, including unit tests, religiously. Like anything else in this version of the world in which we live, unit tests bring value, but also, like everything else, any value comes at a cost. Unit tests are code, plain code on top of the code. And because they are code, they must be tested. They can be bugged, and they may not even deliver the expected behavior if not enough knowledge of the domain, both the domain, the business domain and the testing domain exists around people. And finally, not because you have tests, your code works. You cannot go to a customer and say, hey, but I already tested. Who cares? If the customer reports a bug, whether it's a real bug or a perceived bug, that's it. You have to fix it, period. If you are in a scenario in which you, as a company, face end users, it's a different story, clearly, of course, if you write an API. If you write an API or if you write a domain model, then unit tests are part of your development effort. That's a different story. But as long as you write full stack applications, Unit tests are just one small part. So imagine, as you see in this slide, there is the business analysis, product development, the system architecture, system engineering, full stack code, hosting, middleware, low-level things. And in the red full stack code, unit tests are a very tiny aspect of it. How can you really seriously believe that unit tests, right or wrong, could affect the development of a product, which is a much larger thing with persons, with people on top of that? Development, and I like to quote my friend Kevin Henney, development needs to go farther than the technical stack. The full stack of life includes the world and people around the software. And yes, I believe that with this fields of wisdom, I can stop and take some questions if they are. And beyond this, thank you so far for the time you dedicated to this talk.
Okay, Dino, thank you very much for your speech, and I look at our chat if we have any question to you. I see one question from Adam, and the question is, what about situation where we have 5 to 6 years old project, which is developed by couple teams? Core structure of the project is anchored with unit tests checked on CI level, is protecting features which new developers are not aware. What's your perspective?
This seems like a point that falls in the realm of what to do with legacy code. And I believe that there is just one reasonable way to deal, to approach scenarios like the one that the guy mentioned, trying to identify in the legacy code areas that can be put into a bounded context and write tests again that thing, okay, to check. So in this case, tests, automated tests, make a lot more sense, because I want to make sure that if I do something on top of that, or if I modify something else, certain blocks continue working as expected. But this is not unit tests in the canonical definition, because we are isolating in a bounded context entire pieces of the application with all of their dependencies. So it would be a sort of lightweight integration test within the module. But in this case, it makes sense to write tests. Yeah, it is, and it's vital, because otherwise the alternative is testing manually everything every time. So yes, but we are talking about wrapping up blocks of legacy code into boxes and put them into, ideally, into an interface and test in a sort of integrated way against those blocks. One more point that I didn't mention clearly in the talk, but that fits here is, even though in my personal opinion, unit tests doesn't necessarily deliver great value, it is crucial instead thinking as if you were going to have unit tests elsewhere in the code. Because the point of being ideally able to write code that can be tested in full isolation, with all the dependencies being in a way injectable in every module, so writing for testability, that's the real thing that matters. Because if you do this, your code is of significant quality, even without tests, and this makes falling into 5, 6 years old code base scenario easier to handle for the people that come after you.
Okay, Dino, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for you all for the participation on this slot. We are slightly running out of time, so thank you very much once again, and see you after short break on another talk. See you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Bye.